My husband toasted to his freedom and handed me a t-shirt, calling our marriage a disappointment. He didn't know I'd already sold our house and invited his dead brother to dinner to reclaim the family fortune. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The champagne flute in my husband's hand caught the candlelight, throwing jagged sparks across the white tablecloth. We were sitting at our favorite corner table at Vincenzo's, the air thick with the smell of garlic and expensive leather. It was our 6-year anniversary. I had spent an hour on my hair, choosing a deep blue dress that felt like a second skin, hoping this dinner would be the bridge back to the man I used to know. Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't look at me. He looked at the crowded room, his face splitting into a grin that felt like a warning. To being free, single, and searching, he shouted. His voice echoed off the high ceilings. The restaurant went silent. I felt my pulse spike, a sharp coldness spreading from my chest to my fingertips. Jake slammed his glass against mine, the liquid sloshing over the rim and staining the white linen like a fresh wound. I stared at him, my body turning to stone. This was the man I had shared a bed with for over 2,000 days. This was the man who had promised to cherish me. He wasn't toasting to us. He was toasting to my execution. Jake reached under the table with theatrical flair and pulled out a gift box. He slid it toward me, his eyes gleaming with the triumph that made my stomach churn. Across from us, his mother, Barbara, leaned forward. Her eyes sparkled with a cruel anticipation that told me she had been waiting for this moment. His father, Richard, didn't say a word. His face twisted into that familiar, arrogant smirk I had grown to despise. "Open it, honey," Jake urged. His voice dripped with a false sweetness that felt like poison. I had it specially made just for tonight. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded black t-shirt. I pulled it out, the fabric heavy in my hands. As I unfolded it, bold white letters screamed at me. 6 years of disappointment. The words blurred as the restaurant seemed to tilt on its axis. Every pair of eyes in the building was on me. I could hear a faint chuckle from the table next to us. Jake laughed, a loud, sharp sound that broke the silence. He wasn't just leaving me. He was making sure I was destroyed in front of everyone we knew. I looked at the shirt, then at the man I called my husband. The cracks hadn't appeared overnight, but I had become an expert at ignoring the signs. For the past year, the late nights at the office had multiplied without any real explanation. Our conversations had dwindled to logistical exchanges about bills and schedules. The spark was gone, replaced by cold embers and a silence that lived in the corners of our house. 3 months ago, I had watched him adjust his tie in the mirror. "Working late again?" I had asked. "Big client," he'd mumbled, never meeting my eyes. "Don't wake up." That night, he had come home past midnight, smelling of a cologne that wasn't his. He had headed straight for the shower, claiming the office was stuffy. I had accepted the lie because the truth was too heavy to carry. I buried the rejection beneath excuses about work pressure and bad timing. Even our Sunday mornings, once spent making breakfast together, had been reclaimed by his family. He started scheduling golf with Richard or networking brunches that I was never invited to attend. The house grew so silent in his absence that I found myself talking aloud just to hear a human voice. 6 weeks ago, I had tried one last time. "We should plan something special for our anniversary," I suggested. I wanted to believe there was still something left to save. Sure, he had agreed with the surprising enthusiasm that I mistook for hope. "I'll handle everything. It'll be memorable." He had smiled then, a genuine smile that should have been my final warning. Instead, I let myself feel hopeful. I thought he wanted to repair what was broken. I didn't know he was planning a funeral for our marriage. The truth had actually fallen out of his pocket while I was doing laundry 3 weeks ago. A crumpled receipt from a custom t-shirt shop downtown. I almost threw it away, but something made me smooth it open. The description line read, "Black tea, white print, 6 years of disappointment." My stomach had clenched so hard I thought I might be sick. I tried to tell myself it was a joke for a friend, a gag gift for a bachelor party. But the date on the receipt aligned with the night he said he was working on a merger. Standing there at the table, clutching that black shirt, the memory of that laundry room floor hit me like ice water. I realized I had been living with a stranger. I searched his eyes for any hint of the person I had fallen in love with, but they remained distant, occasionally glancing at his phone, hidden beneath the table. This public humiliation had been the plan all along. He wanted me to be the punchline to his favorite joke. I took a breath, the air in the restaurant feeling thin and sharp. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me, something soft and fragile, finally snapped shut. I realized that if I was going to be the main attraction in his little show, I might as well change the script. I looked at Barbara, whose smile was fixed and cold. I looked at Richard, who was already looking for the waiter to order more champagne. Then I looked at Jake. He was waiting for me to break. He wanted the tears. He wanted me to run out of the building in shame so he could tell the world how unstable I was. I won't give him that. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the heavy folder I had tucked inside earlier that afternoon. I wasn't just coming to dinner. I was coming to a war. I had spent the last few weeks gathering every piece of evidence of his betrayal. I knew about the hotel charges. I knew about the jewelry I never received. And I knew about the woman his parents called Diane. I felt the foundation of my world shift, but this time I wasn't falling. I was standing on solid ground. "I'm so glad you brought this up, Jake," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. It carried across the room, cutting through the murmurs of the other diners. Everyone froze. The waiter stopped mid-step. Jake's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "Because I have a gift for you, too. And I think your parents are going to find it even more memorable than yours." I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers, placing them right on top of the black t-shirt. The white pages looked like a flag of surrender, but they were actually a death warrant for the life Jake thought he was building. I had spent hours in a small cafe near my office, seeking solace in neutral territory, while my home turned into a battlefield. It was there that a waitress named Megan had changed everything. She had recognized my last name. She told me she saw my in-laws at another restaurant every Sunday. They weren't alone. They were with Jake, and they were with a woman named Diane. Jake looked down at the papers, his face turning a mottled shade of red. "What is this?" he hissed. His eyes darted around, checking to see if anyone was watching. I smiled, and for the first time in a year, it felt real. "It's a record of the last 4 months," I said. I made sure to speak loudly enough for the table next to us to hear. "You see, while you were busy siphoning $80,000 from our joint investment portfolio, I was busy siphoning information." Richard's glass hit the table with a sharp crack. Barbara's face drained of color. The restaurant was deathly silent now. People were leaning in, their forks suspended in midair. I watched the realization hit Jake. He thought he had been so careful. He had moved the money in small increments, always just below the notification threshold we had set up. $2,000 here, $1,500 there. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I had called our financial advisor, Mark, pretending everything was normal. I told him Jake mentioned a surprise and asked for the total. Nearly $80,000. Almost half of our liquid savings had been siphoned away to an account I didn't have access to. "You're insane," Jake whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He tried to reach for the papers, but I slid them out of his reach. I wasn't done. I had spent an afternoon in the attic, a space I rarely entered. Jake had insisted on storing our important papers there in a filing cabinet he'd inherited from his father. In the bottom drawer, I had found a cardboard box labeled family. Inside were photos of a different life, photos of a boy named Michael. Jake had a brother, an older brother he had never mentioned in 6 years of marriage. I looked at Richard. "Tell me, Richard, why did you erase Michael?" I asked. The man's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to leap across the table and choke me. Michael was the smart one, the one who found the questionable accounting in the family business. You gave him a choice: fall in line or be erased. He chose erasure, and then you spent 12 years turning Jake into a puppet you could control. You even chose his wife for him, didn't you, Barbara? You thought I was temporary. You told everyone at the wedding that Blue wasn't sophisticated enough for the Collins family, and I believed you were just being difficult. I didn't realize I was just a checkbox on a list. Barbara's hands were shaking so hard, she had to grip the edge of the table. "You're making a scene," she hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Barbara," I said, leaning in. "I'm finally participating." I looked back at Jake. "I know about the burner phone, Jake. I found it in your desk. I read the messages with Diane. You complained about my cooking, my appearance, even my devotion to you. You called my loyalty pathetic. You and Diane were planning a future together as soon as the anniversary was handled. You treated me like a problem to be solved." Jake stood up, his face inches from mine. "Get out," he growled. "We're done." "Oh, we are definitely done," I agreed. "But before I go, there's one more person who wanted to say hello." I turned toward the entrance of the restaurant. I had sent a message to a man in Boston 3 weeks ago. I told him my name was Emma Collins and that I was married to his brother. He had replied with 4 words: Cornerstone Cafe, Sunday, noon. Michael Collins walked through the door of the restaurant. He had Jake's jawline, but eyes that were kinder, eyes that hadn't been hardened by years of seeking Richard's approval. He walked with a confidence that made Jake look like a frightened child. The resemblance was unmistakable. The entire room seemed to gasp at once. Michael stopped at our table and looked at his father. "Hello, Richard," he said. His voice was calm, like a man discussing the weather. "It's been a long time since I've been invited to a family dinner." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the table. Richard looked like he was having a heart attack. Barbara looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Jake just stared, his mouth hanging open. I took Michael's hand, and the warmth of his grip gave me the strength to deliver the final blow. I had realized that I wasn't just a casualty of a failing marriage. I was a victim of a toxic family system. But Michael had shown me the way out. He had showed me the original partnership documents for Collins Financial, the ones Richard had rewritten to cut him out. By law, Michael still owns 25% of the company, I said, looking directly at Richard. And since Jake and I are still legally married, I have a claim to his future share too. My attorney, Sarah Reeves, is very interested in the accounting discrepancies Michael found 12 years ago. It seems they haven't stopped. I think the IRS might be interested too. Jake's face went white. "You wouldn't?" he gasped. "I already did," I replied. I felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with money. I looked at the t-shirt sitting on the table. 6 years of disappointment. You were right about one thing, Jake. These last 6 years have been a disappointment, but not for the reasons you think. They were a disappointment because I wasted them on a man who didn't exist. But that ends tonight. The shock on Jake's face was the most honest thing I had seen from him in years. He looked at Michael, then back at me, his brain clearly struggling to connect the dots. You too? He stammered. I stood my ground, feeling Michael's presence like a shield beside me. We've been talking, Jake, I said. We've been comparing notes. It's amazing how much you can learn when you stop trying to please people who view you as an appliance. Michael stepped forward, placing a folder of his own on the table. It was thick, bound in professional leather, and it looked heavy with the weight of 12 years of secrets. I'm not here for a reunion, Michael said, his voice cutting through the hushed whispers of the surrounding tables. I'm here for my inheritance, and I'm here to make sure Emma gets everything she's owed. Richard, you thought you could erase me, but you forgot that I kept the original ledger. I know exactly how much you've skimmed from your clients over the last decade. Richard's face was a dark, bruised purple. He looked at the folder like it was a live grenade. You're bluffing, he spat, though his voice wavered. That firm is mine. I built it. You built it on lies and other people's money, Michael countered. And now you're going to pay. Emma has already secured her half of the $80,000 you helped Jake hide. She moved her inheritance from her grandmother into a private account weeks ago. You thought she was weak, but she's been 2 steps ahead of you the whole time. I watched Jake's eyes dart to his mother. He was looking for her to fix it, to tell him what to do, but Barbara was frozen. Her carefully cultivated image was shattering in front of the town's elite. She looked at the blue dress I was wearing, the one she had told me never to wear because it clashed with the Collins brand. I looked back at her and smiled. I'm selling the house too, I announced. I met with a real estate agent named Malcolm Reed while you were in Philadelphia with Diane, Jake. The market is hot. We got an offer this morning for significantly above the asking price. Jake's jaw dropped. You can't sell the house without me, he shouted. I reached into my bag and pulled out the listing agreement. You signed this 3 weeks ago, Jake. Remember that stack of work documents you initialed without reading because you were too busy texting Diane under the table? You really should pay more attention to what you put your name on. I've already authorized the sale. My half of the proceeds will be in my account by Friday. The desperation in the room was palpable. Jake looked like he wanted to cry, but there were no tears, only the realization that his trap had snapped shut on his own leg. He had wanted to humiliate me, to leave me with nothing but a t-shirt and a broken heart. Instead, he was facing financial ruin and the return of the brother he had betrayed. The restaurant was buzzing now, the drama unfolding in the corner table more interesting than any meal. I leaned over and picked up the black t-shirt. I held it up for a moment, letting the bold white letters catch the light. You wanted this to be my legacy, I said to Jake. You wanted me to be the woman who was a disappointment. But look around this table. Look at your father, who's terrified of a piece of paper. Look at your mother, who can't even meet my eyes. And look at yourself. You're not free, Jake. You're more of a prisoner than I ever was. You're a puppet for 2 people who don't even love you. They just love the name. I dropped the shirt back into the box. Keep it, I said. It's going to be the only thing you have left when this is over. I turned to Michael. Are we ready? He nodded, his hand moving to the small of my back to lead me away. But I wasn't finished. I had one more thing to say, a secret I had been holding close to my heart for 6 weeks. A secret that would ensure the Collins family never had power over me again. I stopped and looked back at the 3 of them. Oh, and one more thing, I said. My voice was quiet now, but it carried perfectly. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was absolute. Barbara's hand flew to her mouth. Richard slumped back in his chair. Jake looked like he had been struck by lightning. This child will be a Collins, I continued, but they will never know you. They will be raised by someone who understands what loyalty actually means. They will know Michael, and they will know the truth about where they came from. But you're just the disappointment. We walked out of the restaurant then, the cool night air hitting my face like a blessing. I could hear the sounds of the restaurant erupting behind us, the voices of 100 people who had just witnessed the fall of a dynasty. Michael led me to his car, his grip steady and warm. As we pulled away, I looked back at the glowing sign of Vincenzo's. My anniversary dinner was over. My life was just beginning. The drive away from the restaurant felt like breaking through the surface of deep water. For years, I had been holding my breath, trying to stay submerged in the expectations of a family that never wanted me. Now the air was sweet and sharp. Michael didn't say much at first. He just drove, his hand steady on the wheel. He knew the weight of what had just happened because he had carried it for 12 years. I sat in the passenger seat, my hand resting on my stomach. The tiny life inside me was a secret I had only shared with Michael a few days prior. It wasn't a weapon, though it had felt like one in that room. It was a promise. We stopped at a small park overlooking the city. The lights below looked like spilled diamonds. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, turning off the engine. The silence was different here. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the house I shared with Jake. It was open. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I think I'm more than okay," I said. "I think I'm finally awake." I looked at him, the man who had been a ghost in my husband's stories. "Thank you for coming. I couldn't have done that alone." "You would have found a way," Michael said, a small smile touching his lips. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emma. My family has a way of making people feel small so they can feel big. It takes a lot of courage to stop playing their game." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a folder. "This is the rest of it. The documents Sarah Reeves and I prepared. The divorce filing is ready. We're citing irreconcilable differences and adultery. With the evidence of the $80,000 siphoned from the joint account, he's not going to be able to fight the asset split." I looked at the folder. It was strange how my entire life could be reduced to paper and ink. 6 years of marriage, thousands of meals, hundreds of arguments, and it all ended with a signature and a stamp. But I felt a sense of relief. The house was sold, the money was protected, and the truth was out. Jake had wanted a public execution, but he hadn't realized he was the one on the block. He had underestimated me. He had thought my devotion was a weakness, but it was just a capacity he didn't possess. We talked for hours that night, sitting in the quiet of the car. Michael told me more about his childhood, about how Richard would pit the two brothers against each other for his approval. He told me about the night he left, how he had nothing but a suitcase and the ledger he had stolen from the office. I realized then that Jake wasn't just a villain. He was a product. He was the result of two people who valued status over love. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it made me realize that staying with him would have eventually turned me into something I didn't recognize. "I'm moving to Boston," I told Michael. "I've already started looking at apartments. I need to be somewhere where the name Collins doesn't mean anything." Michael nodded. "I can help with that. My firm is looking for someone with your background in analytics. If you're interested, the job is yours. It's not a favor, Emma. You're good at what you do. You found the money Jake hid before I even showed you how to look." I looked at the city lights and felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I had a job, I had a plan, and I had a new ally. The child growing inside me would have a fresh start, far away from the burgundy dresses and the cold expectations of Richard and Barbara. They would grow up knowing they were enough, just as they were. No checklists, no checkboxes, just love. As we drove back toward the city, my phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from Jake. I didn't open them. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his threats. I knew his patterns by heart. He would alternate between rage and pleading, trying to find a way to regain control. But the control was gone. I hit the block button on his number, then on Barbara's and Richard's. The silence that followed was the best anniversary gift I could have asked for. I spent the night at a small hotel near the airport, a neutral space where no one knew my name. I lay in bed, watching the shadows of the planes pass over the ceiling. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't wondering where Jake was. I wasn't wondering if I was enough. I wasn't wondering what I had done wrong. I knew exactly who I was. I was a woman who had been betrayed, yes. But I was also a woman who had fought back. I was a mother-to-be. And I was finally free. The next morning, the world felt different. The sun was brighter, the air crisper. I met with Sarah Reeves at her office at 9 a.m. sharp. She looked at me with a sharp, approving eye. "I heard about the dinner," she said, sliding a cup of coffee across her desk. "Word travels fast in this town. You certainly made an impression." I took a sip of the coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my system. I didn't want a scene, I admitted, but they didn't give me a choice. If they wanted to play it out in public, I figured I should give them the ending they deserved. Sarah nodded, opening my file. "Well, the ending is just beginning. The divorce papers were served to Jake an hour ago. Given the evidence of the $80,000 transfer and the adultery, we're asking for the house proceeds, full restitution of the siphoned funds, and a significant portion of his retirement accounts. And with Michael's evidence regarding the family firm, Richard is going to be too busy dealing with his own legal troubles to help Jake fight this." I felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the money, though the money was necessary for the life I was building. It was about the accountability. For 6 years, the Collins family had operated as if they were above the rules. They thought they could treat people like disposable parts. But the parts had unified. We talked through the logistics, the sale of the house, the transfer of the funds, the timeline for the final decree. Everything was moving fast, just as I wanted. I didn't want to linger in this town any longer than I had to. I left Sarah's office and drove to the house one last time. I needed to pack the things that actually mattered. I didn't want the furniture or the expensive art Barbara had picked out. I wanted my grandmother's pearls, my childhood journals, and the few photos I had that didn't feel like lies. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jake's car. My heart hammered against my ribs for a second, but I didn't turn around. I had as much right to be there as he did. He was sitting in the living room, surrounded by empty beer bottles. The charcoal suit he had worn to dinner was crumpled on the floor. He looked old. He looked small. "You really did it," he said, his voice raspy. "You ruined everything." I didn't stop. I walked past him toward the stairs. "You ruined it yourself, Jake," I said. "I just stopped helping you hide the ruins. You thought you could humiliate me and I would just take it. You forgot that I was the one who kept your life running for 6 years." He followed me into the bedroom, his movements sluggish. "My mother is hysterical," he said. "The firm is under investigation. They're saying Michael has a stake in it. Why did you have to bring him into this?" "Because he was the only one who told me the truth," I said, pulling a suitcase from the closet. "He was the one who showed me what your family really is. You had a brother who loved you, and you let your father erase him for a corner office. You're not a victim here, Jake. You're a collaborator." I spent the next hour packing. I didn't look at him, even when he tried to apologize, even when he tried to blame his parents for the T-shirt. "It was their idea, Emma," he pleaded. "They said it would be funny. They said it would make you realize you didn't belong. And it did, I said, snapping the suitcase shut. It made me realize I belonged somewhere else, somewhere far away from you. As I walked toward the door, I stopped at the vanity. The black t-shirt was sitting there, folded neatly. Jake must have brought it home. I picked it up and tossed it to him. Here, I said, you're going to need this, because for the next few years your life is going to be exactly what this says. A disappointment. I walked down the stairs and out the front door, never looking back. I drove toward the highway, the car packed with my life. I had a new apartment waiting for me in Boston, a new job starting in 2 weeks, and a new family beginning to grow. I looked in the rearview mirror as the town faded into the distance. The weight of the last 6 years was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt like iron in my bones. I was free. I was single, and I wasn't searching anymore. I had found exactly what I needed. I had found myself. I pulled into a rest stop a few miles down the road and took a deep breath. I pulled out my phone and sent one last message to Michael. I'm on my way, I wrote. He replied almost instantly. See you soon. I looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a long golden light over the road ahead. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to walk into it. The Collins family was behind me, a chapter of a book I had finally finished. I was ready for the next one. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The engine hummed, a steady, reassuring sound. I felt a tiny flutter in my stomach, the first sign of the life that was coming. I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I was Emma, just Emma, and that was more than enough. I drove into the sunset, leaving the disappointment behind and moving toward the light. The skyline of Boston loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel that promised a world where no one knew the name, Collins. I pulled my car into the narrow parking garage of my new apartment complex, the engine's hum echoing against the concrete walls like a held breath finally released. For 6 years, my life had been a series of performances staged for an audience of 3, Jake, Barbara, and Richard. But as I cut the ignition, the silence was mine alone. I checked my phone and saw a single text from Michael. Key is under the mat at the office if you beat me there. I didn't beat him, but I didn't need to hurry anymore. Time had stopped being a resource Jake siphoned away and had become something I owned. I spent my first night in Boston on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the smell of fresh paint. My hand stayed rested on my stomach, a constant vigil for the life that was now the center of my universe. The next morning, I walked into Michael's financial consulting firm, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Michael stood up from his desk, his resemblance to Jake still a sharp jolt, but his smile was devoid of the hidden barbs I had come to expect from that face. He handed me a folder, not one filled with betrayals this time, but with the onboarding paperwork for my new role as a senior analyst. You look like you actually slept, Michael noted, his eyes scanning my face with a genuine concern that made my throat tighten. I nodded, taking the folder. No ghost in the guest room, I replied, sitting across from him. We spent the morning working, our professional synergy as effortless as our shared defiance. But the peace was shattered at noon when my phone buzzed with a notification from the real estate portal. The sale of the house was officially in escrow. A moment later, an email from Sarah Reeves landed in my inbox. Jake is contesting the signature on the listing agreement. He's claiming he was under duress. I felt the old familiar spark of panic, but Michael was already leaning over the desk. He can't prove duress when there are 3 weeks of text messages between him and Diane discussing his plan to leave you? Michael said, his voice a steadying force. I realized he was right. Jake was playing a losing hand with the desperation of a man who had never been told no. I called Sarah back immediately. Tell him if he pushes the duress claim, we'll include the burner phone transcripts in the public filing instead of keeping them in the private discovery, I told her. The line went quiet for a second before Sarah chuckled. That'll shut him up. Barbara won't let that hit the social circles. That evening, Michael and I sat in a small Italian place that reminded me nothing of Vincenzo's. We weren't hiding anymore, but the habit of vigilance was hard to break. Richard is trying to liquidate assets, Michael told me, his expression darkening. He knows the audit is coming. He's trying to move money into Barbara's offshore accounts. I felt a cold surge of determination. Then we move faster, I said. If he empties the firm before the lawsuit hits, your 25% stake won't be worth the paper it's printed on. We stayed up late into the night, mapping out the flow of the Collins family's deceit, 2 survivors turning the hunters into the prey. The legal battle escalated with a ferocity that would have broken the woman I was a year ago. Richard Collins didn't just fight, he tried to bulldoze. I received a formal cease and desist regarding the house sale, followed by a series of threatening voicemails from Jake that I forwarded directly to Sarah. But the real blow came 3 weeks into my new life when a courier arrived at the office with a thick envelope addressed to me. Inside was a petition for a gag order and a countersuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress regarding the anniversary dinner. Barbara had finally found her voice, and she was using it to try and bury the truth in legal fees. She wants to bankrupt you before the divorce is final, Sarah warned me over a video call. I looked at the $80,000 I had secured. It was a lot. But against the Collins family war chest, it was a drop in the bucket. I felt the weight of their legacy pressing down on me again, the invisible strings of Richard and Barbara trying to pull me back into their shadow. I went to Michael's office, the petition shaking in my hand. They won't stop until I'm back on my knees, I said, my voice cracking for the first time since I left. Michael took the papers, his face a mask of cold fury. They're not just fighting you anymore, Emma. They're fighting me. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. Mark, it's Michael Collins. I need you to pull the records from the 2014 restructuring. Yes, the ones my father told you were lost in the server migration. He looked at me and winked. While Jake had been focused on his wardrobe and his mistress, Michael had been building a digital fortress. He had access to a secondary backup server Richard had forgotten existed. The countermove was a masterpiece of timing. We didn't respond to the gag order. We filed a motion for emergency discovery. We presented the proof of Richard siphoning client funds, not from 12 years ago, but from last month. The discrepancies Michael had found as a young man had become a systemic rot that now threatened the entire firm. Within 48 hours, the gag order was dropped. Barbara realized that the more they fought, the more the public would see of the skeletons in their mahogany closets. But the stress took its toll. I found myself sitting in the bathroom of the office, the same way I had on the floor of the house in the suburbs, feeling the world tilt. I was 12 weeks pregnant, and the battle was far from over. Michael found me there, his hand hesitant before he knocked. Emma, the real estate agent, called. The buyer for the house is Richard's brother-in-law. They're trying to buy it back through a shell company to keep your proceeds tied up in litigation. I stood up, smoothing my dress, the blue fabric now a bit tighter than before. Let them buy it, I said, my voice hardening, but tell Malcolm the price just went up by $50,000. If they want their secrets kept in that house, they're going to pay for the privilege. The walls were closing in on the Collins dynasty. By the second month of the proceedings, the financial regulatory authorities had opened a formal inquiry into Collins Financial. Richard was forced to step down as CEO, and Jake was placed on administrative leave that everyone knew was permanent. I watched the news from my desk in Boston, feeling a strange lack of triumph. It was just gravity. They had built a tower of lies, and it was finally collapsing under its own weight. Jake showed up at my apartment one rainy Tuesday night. He didn't look like the man in the charcoal suit anymore. He was soaking wet, his eyes bloodshot, smelling of cheap scotch instead of expensive cologne. "You have to stop this," he pleaded, leaning against the doorframe. "My father is losing everything. My mother hasn't left her room in a week. Just take the money and drop the lawsuit." I looked at him and saw the spare Michael had described, the boy who had been molded into a weapon and was now discarded because he had failed to hit the target. "I didn't start the lawsuit, Jake. Michael did," I said, keeping the door chain on. "And I didn't siphon the money. You did." He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of the man I thought I loved, a glimmer of the person who once made me breakfast on Sundays. "I loved you, Emma." "In my own way," he whispered. I felt a pang of grief, but I pushed it down. "Your own way involved a custom t-shirt and a mistress, Jake. That's not love. That's ownership." I closed the door on him, the sound of the lock clicking into place like the final note of a long, discordant song. 2 weeks later, the settlement offer arrived. It was more than I had asked for. Richard was desperate to avoid a public trial that would lead to criminal charges. He offered to settle Michael's claim for the full 25% of the firm's valuation from before the scandal hit, and he agreed to all my divorce terms without further contest. The only condition was that we sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific details of the accounting fraud. Michael and I sat in Sarah's office, looking at the documents that would change our lives forever. "If you sign this, you get the house proceeds, the $80,000, and an additional settlement of $200,000. Sarah explained, her pen poised over the paper. I looked at Michael. He didn't need the money. His firm was thriving. He was doing this for the legacy. "What about the child?" I asked. The agreement stated that the child would have no claim to future Collins estates, but would receive a trust fund managed by a neutral third party. I shook my head. "No trust fund from Richard. I don't want his money in my child's future. I'll take the settlement for myself, but my baby stays entirely out of their ledger." We crossed out the clause and signed the rest. The final decree of divorce arrived on a bright morning in late autumn. I sat on the balcony of my new home, a real home this time, filled with things I had chosen myself. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. I was 6 months pregnant, and the life inside me was strong and restless. The house in the suburbs had been sold. The money was in my account, and the Collins name was a fading bruise in my memory. Michael came over that evening, bringing a small box wrapped in blue paper. "A housewarming gift," he said, handing it to me. I opened it to find a silver rattle, simple and elegant. "It's not an heirloom," he added, his eyes meeting mine. "It's a beginning." We sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The silence was comfortable, the kind of silence that only comes when the truth has finally been told. Jake had moved to Florida with Diane, or so I had heard through the grapevine. Richard and Barbara had retreated to their summer house, their social standing in the town obliterated by the audit. They were still wealthy, but they were alone, prisoners of the image they had spent 40 years crafting. I didn't hate them anymore. I just didn't think of them. They were characters in a story I had stopped reading. I looked at the silver rattle in my hand and thought about the child who would never have to wear a burgundy dress or apologize for the color of their dreams. They would grow up knowing Michael as an uncle who stood up for what was right, and they would know me as a mother who wouldn't be broken. My 6-year anniversary had been a public execution, but from the ashes, I had built something indestructible. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I didn't see the disappointment Jake had tried to label me as. I saw a woman who was free, who was whole, and who was finally, truly home. The path ahead wasn't a checkbox on someone else's list. It was a road I was building with every step. Hand in hand with the people who actually loved me, I walked toward the light of a new day, leaving the shadows of the Collins family exactly where they belonged, in the past. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.